All right. So, Scuff Stream, of course. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to my Twitch channel that I stream on all the time. I'm a prolific Twitch streamer. This definitely isn't my first stream in like 2 months. I'm very good at this, as you can already tell. And today I'm having a debate/conversation, not a whole lot of difference between them, with Donovan Cleckly.
Cleckly. Yeah, sorry. It's okay.
There you go. Donovan Cleckly.
Don't worry.
Sweet. All right. So, can you kind of introduce yourself and yeah, you know what? You have to do the work for me because I'm so bad at this. Introduce yourself and introduce the topic of our discussion today.
So, hi everyone. My name is Donovan Cleckly. I'm with the New Gay Liberation Front, and Justin and I will be discussing, trans rights in relation to homophobia, as well as, issues around gender dysphoria, assistance, and detransition.
Okay, so what would you say the role of the New Gay Liberation Front is? So it's a relatively new organization, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Couple weeks old?
Yeah, just a few weeks old now. The organization, it is not about being, anti-trans per se, as much as I feel that it's about addressing specifically the needs of lesbians and gay men with regard to, same-sex orientation. And some of the issues that, as I've discussed with you when I sent you the messages in the email regarding gender dysphoria among, gender dysphoria as diagnosed among lesbian and gay youth. So that's one of the big things, is just sort of filling this need, as have many other women's rights groups that have sort of sprung up regarding the problem with changing sex in law to gender identity. That there's some.
So where do you see when you say the specific needs of gay and lesbians? Where do you see that's not falling in line with the broader LGBT organizations, the broader queer organizations? Where do you think that gay and trans people have odds with each other, that we would have to have a separate organization? Because if you didn't know, I am a gay man. I'm a cis gay man. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just letting all the identities go out there. You're free to share yours if you would like. I'm not going to make you. So as a gay man, so how do my needs, how can I be served by an organization that's, and correct me if this isn't fair, excludes trans people from its advocacy?
I too am a gay man, and was a boy. I'm very, very feminine, but I do not identify with cisgender, because I don't believe that people naturally identify with either masculinity or femininity. I think
that's where the social construction of gender.
And so I think what we kind of address and are thinking about is this sort of homophobia that sprung up with regard to sort of conflating sex and gender identity, and I find that problematic. This idea.
Can you tell me how that's homophobic? Conflating sex.
So for example, the idea that a member of the male sex who's sexually oriented toward members of the opposite sex, that is females, can become a woman and a lesbian and enters lesbian spaces. And the idea that there's such a thing as a female penis. The idea that a member of the female sex who's sexually oriented toward members of the opposite sex, that is males, can claim to be a man and a gay man. And this idea that there's such a thing as a male vagina.
I guess, well, there's a couple of things there, but one of the biggest things that I wanted to address is, what is your definition of sex? And is this the definition of sex that you think the NGLF, is this what
Yes.
definition are they using and you using?
So the way in which we define sex is it's on the basis of human sexual dimorphism, which is separate from the idea of the gender binary. People end up conflating the gender binary with sexual dimorphism, and I think that produces confusion in these debates, reasonably. conflating the two. But the way in which we define it is this, like, it's on the basis of biology, biological sex, as it has been defined.
I love me some biology. I love me some science.
Yeah, totally. And so our problem that we take really is with this kind of social and political and legal and medical redefinition of sex through gender identity. So saying that, for example, one's gender identity actually makes one, male versus female, we find that to be problematic.
It always depends on context, though, right? What I want to so a large portion of the website, the New Gay Liberation Front, is talking about like specifically homophobia in regards to like same-sex attraction, and I believe that you've defined yourself out of a meaningful discussion of same-sex attraction, because so I call this like the binary seeking definition. You've decided that there should be, and I'm saying you, the royal you, not you specifically. If you decide that sex is binary and immutable, you have to go down to something like very, very minute, which is usually gametes. Can't be chromosomes, because chromosomes are not binary. Can't be genitals, because genitals can be changed like through surgery, so they're not immutable. So usually it's something to do with like gametes. What gametes do you produce? And when you've defined
the production of ova versus the production.
Yeah, the large and mobile versus small and mobile. But when you define sex that narrowly, in that like minute detail, that's not how sexual attraction works. We're not attracted to gametes. I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but it seems like we're more attracted to. It seems like a gender. Talking about attraction in terms of gender is actually more accurate, because when you define sex that narrowly, I don't think anybody's meaningfully attracted to gametes. Like, that's not something that has been discussed in any literature. None of the literature like addresses that, because it just seems that's not really where human sexuality comes from. But things like gender, now that can't be an attraction. So when I talk about, like, I want to get real cringy. I don't want to tell you the type of guys I like. When I talk about what I'm attracted to, it's like, I like guys, if just physical traits. I like guys who are big and hairy, got deep voices, beards a plus. Actually, no, beards like almost you gotta have a beard. Give me a beard. But all those things are secondary sex characteristics, so it wouldn't fall within this like immutable binary definition of sex that seems to be posited by your organization.
I would say that that's a bit reductionistic in saying.
Well, that would be my argument. Yeah.
Well, because saying, if you define sex on the basis of the production of large gametes versus small gametes, that people are not attracted to gametes. Okay, sure. However, there is this issue with saying, okay, well, so now we've defined sex and sexual orientation vis-a-vis, sex role stereotyping, such as, we've masculinized this member of the female sex. Therefore, homosexual males or otherwise gay men can then, like this member of the opposite sex. We feminized this member of the male sex. Therefore, members of the female sex who are otherwise sexually oriented toward females should like this other person. It's then taking sex and then defining it, or rather gender, through sex role stereotyping.
I don't think that's exactly true. Sex role stereotyping might not be.
Sex role stereotyping. When you incredibly masculinize the female body on the basis of this idea of achieving some ideal male appearance.
This doesn't have to be an ideal male appearance. There is.
This idea of having a beard.
I'm just saying that those things. I'm just thinking those muscular. Are things that I like, but they're not a determining factor in like who I end up with, right?
But I do find it troubling still that you're kind of, and one of the arguments and one of the issues that I have with this argument within transgenderism is a kind of disembodiment of human sexuality and sort of actually taking it out of the body. That's something that is really concerning.
Taking human sexuality
feeds into this idea of mind-body dualism that is central to transgenderism.
We have to talk about sexuality in terms outside of the body, because sexuality has a lot of social influences. Would you agree with that?
I believe that there are social factors that influence it beyond exclusively biological factors.
And there's no dichotomy between social factors and biology,
Mhm.
right? But we are social organisms, all right. It's got to have
Yeah,
in fact, an understanding.
human beings are social
Yeah,
creatures.
and a lot of people say biology to mean something like it's innate. It wouldn't it would happen regardless of social context, but that's not really how biology works. Like one of the reasons, like one of the defining characteristics of life is the ability to adapt to your environment. So I'm still having trouble. Why do you not like this argument that because you've defined sex so narrowly that no human sexuality cannot be meaningfully? Here's my argument. I'll restate it again. If you define sex that narrowly, you define it so narrowly that it becomes a meaningless factor when we talk about sexuality and sexual attraction. Because what does it mean to be attracted to someone of a sex? What does it mean to be? What does that mean to you?
I think that the question could also be posed: what does it mean to be attracted to gender? That's also troubling. And I think that
that's a whataboutism.
What I would like to do is say, we haven't.
But can you answer that question though? Like, what does it mean?
One of the interesting things about this whole idea, how can you be sexually attracted to sex? It feels a bit redundant asking it in some ways, because sexual orientation is on the basis of sex, and you're also
but no, it isn't.
You're arguing that it's a narrow definition.
It is a very narrow definition. You've made it narrow.
It's not a very narrow definition.
Narrow. You've made it immutable and binary. That's a very narrow definition of sex. It's about as narrow a definition of sex as you can have.
But human sexual dimorphism, it is actually real. It is.
I know it's real, but there's also in what context are we talking about in terms of reproductive biology? Yeah, human sexual dimorphism is a useful way to look at human biology. But outside of that, in a lot of the areas that we're talking about, like human sexual attraction, human sexuality, in a lot of the social issues that are important, what facilities that someone can use, that hard binary immutable sexual dimorphism becomes a lot less relevant, becomes a lot less meaningful in terms of our discussion. So I'll go back to again. What does it mean to be attracted to a sex? What does that mean?
I suppose it would mean members of that sex, members of sex generally. Being sexually attracted to males, homosexual.
But how can you determine
oriented toward other members of the same sex?
But if that definition of sex is so minute, is so tiny that you're not meaningfully going to be able to ascertain someone's sex, you're making proxy judgments, right? You're using gender way more than you're using sex. If you meet somebody, you probably see them for the first time with their clothes on, and you're relying a lot more on presentation, their affect, their gender, way more than you are on your definition of sex. And to me, that's where attraction and sexuality, that's where most of it happens, right there.
However, is physiology not about sex markers? Aren't there average differences between male and female bodies?
Of course, but then you're talking about secondary sex characteristics, and those those are not immutable. Those can be changed a lot, actually, either through quote unquote natural processes like working out, dieting, grooming. Those things can be changed quite a bit. Like a beard is a secondary sex characteristics. I can get rid of this in a day. I never would, but I could. And other things like body hair, that could be there could be exogenous hormones or any number of factors that can influence that. And so and I feel like that's fair. We can talk about that, but then you have to adopt a definition of sex and sexual characteristics that is not immutable, that is not binary. And I'm not doing this to erase homosexuality or to erase women or anything. I'm doing it because it seems like has a lot more utility when we talk about human sexuality.
I'm wondering though, one of the things about gender identity that I think is interesting too is so separate from let's say separate from medical interventions to alter secondary sex characteristics, separate from any alteration whatsoever, do you think a member of the male sex who's undergone nothing at all, who claims a female gender identity, is a lesbian? Do you believe that yourself?
Sure.
Because this idea that a heterosexual male who's undergone no kind of intervention, no sort of medicalization, can claim a female gender identity and then be considered a lesbian.
Of course, I think.
Do you believe that?
Of course, though? I think their own understanding of their sexuality says that they feel that they are a woman attracted to women. Now, whether that's reciprocated is another story. So I don't think anyone is owed sexual attraction. But yeah, under their own definition, like there's some discussion that I've had with like a lot of like transpositive people of like, instead of talking about like gay, why not talk about androphilic attraction or gynophilic attraction or whatever the fancy Latin word would be for like somewhere in between. I'm not well versed on my Latin. I think there's something to that, because like that's when we're talking. When we're talking about like conversion therapy, we're usually talking about it on the basis of we're changing your attraction on the not front end or not back end. Bad words. We're talking about like we're trying to change you from androphilic to something else. All right, but this notion of like if you're androphilic before a treatment and you're androphilic after a treatment, I don't feel like your sexual orientation has changed at all. I don't think your sexuality has changed at all in terms of like what you as the person are attracted to. And so like I don't agree that like if someone is attracted to men and they change their gender, I don't think that their sexuality has changed. Just what we call that sexuality, the label might have changed.
That is something to remark upon in the research. It's something that I've seen where they measure sexual orientation on the basis of, for example, you have like heterosexual people or otherwise like people who are sexually oriented toward the opposite sex in the traditional sense, who when they transition, they would be otherwise listed as lesbian and gay, and would then be within the purview of the lesbian and gay community. That's something that I found that's quite interesting, you know.
Well, of course, but that's us placing labels upon them. Their actual attraction didn't change.
So you think that the individual is the one who should be like the ultimate controller of all the labels, right? That
I think that's a nice idea.
Be able to identify however you want.
I think that's a nice idea, but the way labels work in society is like, since language is a social construct, there does have to be some sort of agreement.
So there is a social meaning there.
Of course. I mean, there's a social meaning to identifying as gay, right? Like you can say that gay is an identity as much as, and you could say gay is an identity that is separate from attraction, that is separate from androphilic attraction, right? We can say that you can adopt that identity. Like I wouldn't say that if someone doesn't want to identify as gay, even if they have some same-sex attraction, I wouldn't say like, no, you're actually gay. I think that's an identity you have to adopt on your own. I think that's perfectly fair and in line with how trans people identify themselves. I guess where I'm coming from is I see a lot of overlap between like arguments against gay people like not even 10 years ago, and then like arguments against trans people now. And I think a lot of those arguments are being made by the organizations like this and organizations like it.
So I've always been a bit hesitant about the analogy that's been drawn, because I think it's interesting to me to see people who say, okay, so we have lesbians and gay men who are sexually oriented toward the same sex on the one hand, which includes also bisexual people who, you know, sexually oriented toward members of both sexes, but are discriminated against socially for the most part on the basis of same-sex attraction. However, then there's this like other idea that one can actually become the opposite sex on the basis of gender identity and this kind of thing. And that was what I've had trouble, you know, squaring the analogy between those two, or sort of seeing how they are analogous. Because on the one hand, we have
a lot of it has to do with gender nonconformity, right? I mean, when you talk about gender nonconformity, I mean, liking your same sex is pretty. That's pretty far.
That's gender nonconformity.
Of course, right? So we can,
you know, and
so there's
it's
a lot
interesting. It is interesting that you introduce yourself as cis. When, you know, you're pretty gender nonconforming if you're a gay man, right?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, Kurtis is in the chat. He asked.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can always tell, right?
I wasn't reading the chat. But yeah, I think that it is quite interesting. I've just always I think that it could be something to write about and think about some more with regard to like the born this way narrative versus the born in the wrong body narrative. And these two that have sort of, although they've been used side by side in some ways, there are conflicts there, particularly as regard to like lesbian and gay youth with relation to the development of gender dysphoria. But I think
is there any meaningful research? It's kind of like this homophobia of the gaps that I've noticed in a lot of the arguments that gender critical people make. Is there any evidence to suggest that like kids are transitioning because of homophobia. I'm trying to think of any. There are very few instances. I think not Israel, Iran maybe is one place where this happens. Like, they'll transition gay people to be trans because that's like the one place where it's better to be a trans person than it is to be a gay person. But I think in most of the literature that is done, like, in the UK and the US, I think if you're homophobic, you're probably transphobic too, if not more transphobic than homophobic. So I don't see where that happens. I don't understand this idea that you can be homophobic but not transphobic. That doesn't seem very common at all. In fact, it probably happens the other way a little bit more, right?
I disagree. I think that there is a significant influence of homophobia. In particular, you discuss the Iran situation. It was reported on an LGBTQ Nation a while ago, I believe. One of the activists was quoted saying that the government, as a form of state control against lesbian and gay people, found it more useful to heterosexualize lesbian,
and you won't hear any trans rights advocates saying that that's
otherwise homosexual people, heterosexualizing them as a kind of that mass surgeries in favor.
Wait, you understand? Like all of us think that's bad. Like, I doubt you will meet a trans rights advocate who says that is a good model. Like, they're going to be as like.
It was interesting that Charlotte Clymer on Twitter, for example, a transgender activist, was quoted saying, gender affirming care is guaranteed in Iran. That was a tweet from Clymer.
But do you think that she would say that that's good? I would want to know the context of that.
I don't know. I feel like Clymer was trying to clap back at people by saying that Iran offered gender affirming care, and that was absurd.
Okay, well, I don't agree with that. Well, I certainly don't agree with that.
However, what I will say,
that also has nothing to do with like internalized homophobia.
I think that one of the interesting things with regard to like early life and homophobia, and this was something that I messaged to you. With regard to some of the prominent cases of transgender children, you have, for example, the case of Jazz Jennings involving like this child who early in life had been like told, that like there were girl things and there were boy things. Felt like I have a girl brain in a boy body. The parents actually had, according to the children's book itself, prevented Jazz from being able to wear dresses outside in public as a boy. But as a girl, Jazz got to wear the dresses outside. And that was kind of interesting to me. It showed positive and negative reinforcement of sex role stereotyping. And more than that,
I will say that I'd have to read that. I will say, I don't know if I want to take.
You'll have to watch. I would recommend reading the children's book "I'm Jazz" and watching
because like wearing a dress, is that homophobic or is like cis normative? Enforcing these gender roles, that could just as easily be transphobic as homophobic. In fact, I'd say transphobia has more of a role to play than homophobia, because homophobia is like kind of almost, it's about sexual attraction, like being trans. One of the reasons that like trans kids can exist, where like gay kids, it's a little bit harder because until you have a sexuality, you don't know what it is.
However,
gender,
think about
well, I'm not done. Like gender is one of the first lenses that we have when we look at the world, and so it makes more sense. And I would say that. That's more cisnormative than heteronormative, although there's certainly overlap there.
I disagree. I find that if you read, for example, Sandra Lipsitz Bim's book, The Lenses of Gender from 1993, she discusses how this kind of social stigmatization of effeminate boys relates and correlates in many ways to homophobia, to societal homophobia.
Of course, there's overlap there, but
supposed to be the idea that boys are not supposed to be feminine is related to that homophobia.
But isn't also not related
to be masculine is related to that.
But is it not related to transphobia as well? Couldn't there be overlap there? I'm saying that there's overlap. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's like cis heteronormativity. That's what we're fighting here. But the cis is part of that.
I disagree. I don't think there is such a thing as cisgender at all.
Do you think straight people exist?
Identify. I don't.
Do you think straight people
actually identify with gender?
Do you think straight people exist?
Heterosexual people, yes.
Straight people.
Yeah.
Why do we need a word for that, right? If there are people who identify as trans, why can't there be a word that, like, because like cis was not
But
invented.
I think it's on the presumption that that most of the people identify naturally with sex role stereotypes. And
Most people identify. Most people are heterosexual.
but I think it is quite different to presume via the term cisgender that most people are identifying with this thing that is for all intents and purposes socially constructed.
Well,
And
everything's socially constructed, right?
as you've said, sexuality is socially constructed, et cetera, et cetera.
I know. I don't like when we talk about socially constructed. Like everything's socially constructed, and it's the most accurate definition of social construction is also useless. Everything's socially constructed. Okay, well, fuck. What do we do now? But yeah, like. Why is cis a bad word? Like cis did not exist. Like it existed prior to transgender people. Right? We have trans fats. We have cis fats. It's just like the Latin opposite of trans. So what? Like people are cis just because it's a category that we have now. Even if you don't think trans people are legitimate in their identity, it's still a descriptor for people who identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth. Like, it's still.
Well, not identify with sex, identifying with gender.
Well, your identity. Well, if you can't identify as a sex, like people do it. Like I identify as a male. I identify as a man. So I'm identifying with the sex that was assigned to me at birth by the definition that you said. It's part of my identity. So part of my identity is a man, and I think that's something that's often overlooked. Is like cis people have gender identities. I certainly have one. It's something that I'm 31. I know the gray hair makes it look like I'm 60 something, but I've struggled with my gender identity. Not in the way that I'd ever thought that I was trans, but am I really a man if I like men? Do I have to like be a big power lifter bodybuilder in order to truly be a man? So like yeah, there is an identity there. Like there's me identifying with a man took something, and that's an identity. It's not something that I see that is innate within me. It's something that I've identified for myself based on the society around me. So if I have a gender identity, like I think it's perfectly.
I mean, similarly, like there's more to say on the introduction of the concept of gender identity into the literature and the way in which it was kind of conceptualized to be, in itself, like at its very origin with Robert Stoller. This was, I believe, in 66 or 67. It was kind of originated on the idea of is the man being masculine enough? If he's masculine enough, he has a male identity. Is the woman feminine enough? If she's feminine enough, she has a female identity. These sorts of
yeah, of course. Like we're all like none of us say that like the gender binary.
And
it's not a bad thing, but it's not a good thing. It's fine if you It's fine if you like feel comfortable in those identities of like a masculine man, a feminine woman. That's fine. But all else agree, like you should be able to like identify with whatever makes you happiness and most comfortable, right? We all agree with that, right?
Yeah, I think part of what concerns me is this kind of like, in some ways, this taking of it as inborn and innate, and that's something that I've taken an issue with regard to gender identity, because of course, there is the research that suggests like, gender identity there. Of course, it's development. It's there's gender identity development, and of course, it's dynamic.
Do you believe that sexuality is innate?
Sexual orientation, I think based on the research that's been given, I mean, Deborah So and some others have talked about like, a neurological basis for sexual orientation regarding like same sex.
Oh, of course, but that's not the same thing as innate
orientation. Right? But I think that there are like substantial differences between like, when we talk about sexual orientation versus when we talk about gender identity. And to me,
one of your things was gender identity. You have an issue with it being called innate. So would you call sexuality innate?
I would say that sexual orientation, it's for homosexual people and for heterosexual people, like, there's the idea of born this way. And I believe that it's primarily related to like, biological, and physiological factors. But of course, there's also, as we know, the social and cultural factors that sort of
and all of those are like
and that they're always kind of at once influencing and acting upon it.
Yeah, they're influencing each other, right? There's not this dichotomy. If it was a Venn diagram, it would be almost a circle.
Yeah, I think that there's there's something to gender identity that I think requires a bit more unpacking. And it requires a bit more unpacking regarding also the influence of sexual orientation on gender identity itself as well. So there's also this interaction between, of course, sexuality and this like leaning toward, the more or less masculine, the more or less feminine. So I think there's more of an interaction there that I wish would be more explored.
Of course, I am never going to not be for more research on anything. So
yeah, I mean, I don't want
stuff.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want you to think that I'm like, that I want to just say like conclusive things, because I would like in particular around like gender dysphoria, in particular, more studies, more research regarding it, more long-term research,
sure,
in particular regarding social and medical transitioning. So I'm not,
a lot of some of the long-term research has been, I wish people who didn't know how to read studies wouldn't try to read studies. Like do you know how to pronounce the Sweden studies author? It's got like 9 vowels in a row. Huh?
Dejny?
That's how it's pronounced? Sorry. Swedish people with
I mean,
names.
it's
I'm kidding.
Her name is Cecilia or something.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, don't worry.
But a lot of people say like, hey, we'll point to this study and say, hey, see, like gender transitioning doesn't work. In fact, it's on the Kurtis. If you're in here, you need to change that. All right, it's on your website that study is proof that like transitioning doesn't work. That's not what the study says. You should probably take that down. Actually, both of the studies that you used, what was the other one? I have it pulled up here. The block at all.
Was it a 20?
Yeah, block at all. It also doesn't say that. So I feel like you should probably take that down. Neither of the studies say what you think they do in regards to like transitioning not working. And now
I point out.
And now you're gone.
Oh no!
I done told you. I can't do this. Now what I'm not going to do is touch anything ever again. Okay?
Oh, does it show me?
It shows you now.
Yay!
I'm gonna pin you. Remove pin.
Yay!
Did I miss? Oh, you can't. Nope. Oh, I messed it up again. Anyway, keep talking. All right.
Oh no. I really I think you did have a point regarding your critique of Anderson. For example, his when Harry became Sally from 2018. And the reason why I point out the Dejny and the block studies is not to say, oh, well, they say, oh.
No, you're good. No, I'm just, don't touch anything. Don't breathe.
Oh.
Okay, we're good. You can keep talking.
And it's not to say that, social and medical transitioning does not work in every single case. I think that would be one of those cases of, making like too conclusive a claim. For example, at the end of the Dejny study, it mentions that although social and medical transitioning can work in some ways to alleviate feelings of dysphoria, one of the issues is, of course, maintaining continued follow-up with the patients and providing psychological and somatic support, which is also.
But a lot of people.
And I think
a lot of people using that study to reach these false conclusions are they're not making the correct comparison that they need to. They say they say that because the trans people in the study did not achieve like cis normative levels of mental health, or they still had a suicide rate that was far elevated above the cis population, that therefore transitioning doesn't work. And that's just not how that works. That's not a correct view of how of validity of what they were measuring, of variables. The
thing about
they also introduced how like after 1989 the results were different. They were statistically different, and they attributed that to a lot of like societal attitudes.
Oh no.
Hello?
You froze for a second. Can you still see me?
I can still see you, yeah.
Yay. Okay. But yeah, I think one of the points with the Dejny as well as the block 2021, I don't think it necessarily means, it's always bad in every single case. I don't think that
mean it's bad in any case. That's not what the study, you can't draw that conclusion from the study.
But I also don't think that you could say, oh, well, social and medical transitioning does absolutely improve mental.
Of course not. Not from that study. That's not the variable.
I don't think you could also make that claim.
You couldn't, because that's not what the study's measuring. It doesn't say either way. It's comparing the trans population to the cis population, which is fine. That's a useful comparison to make, but you can't say like transitioning works either way. Like for example, like you can easily make the case that because gay people have far higher rates of like drug abuse, we have higher rates of we have higher rates of like suicidality and depression. Like okay, therefore being gay is bad because we don't have the same levels of like mental health as like the heterosexual population. So you would that wouldn't make sense either, right? There's a lot more to mental health than that.
One of the problems though too is of course like with homosexuality you don't have the medicalization element there. Which I think is also significant.
But in terms of like mental health, you could make the same argument either way. And it all comes down to like societal attitudes do matter, and this is proven true for trans people and gay people. If you have a supportive environment around you, that's going to drastically improve your mental health. I think this is inarguable in either case, and I think that's important. And so what I'm worried about is like I want an inclusive environment for everybody, and that includes trans people. But it seems like a lot of these organizations, like the New Gay Liberation Front, don't necessarily want that, or think it's gone too far, or something to that effect. So I guess I don't know if it was a topic, but do you want to talk about like trans ideology and what that means to you? What is trans ideology? Because it's something that's or gender ideology, I should say.
Yeah, totally. So in some cases, criticisms of it's referred to as like gender identity ideology in some cases, as well as transgenderism.
Gender identity ideology almost sounds ridiculous. Yeah.
But of course, I mean, I think that there is, as I mentioned earlier, there is this kind of problem with, the way in which gender identity is kind of taken as this kind of way through which to, replace sex in law. And there are problems, of course, as you know, with like single sex services and spaces.
I know that there are problems. I know that the problems exist, but I don't agree that they should be problems. So we're going to... Like, there's no evidence to suggest that, like, trans women sharing the same spaces as cis women, there's no evidence to suggest that does any harm whatsoever. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that trans women face a disproportionate amount of violence. So I feel like...
However, I still believe that the women and girls deserve single-sex services and spaces, including rape relief shelters, including battered women shelters, as well as single-sex sports, which is I'm not going to get into the sports.
I have, just so you know, we got two degrees in exercise science, so I'm not going to.
But of course, unfair, there's been controversy surrounding that.
There's been controversy, but there's controversy around like gay marriage too. I don't think there's controversy is not a good argument. So like, why is it important that cis women maintain cis only spaces? That's how I'm going to phrase it.
It's not cis only spaces though. It's about female only spaces.
That's what I mean. Like
it's absurd. It's really absurd that what you're doing is you're changing things to be like about cis versus trans.
But that's what you're doing.
It's rather about talking about males versus females.
But that's what you're doing. These trans women they are women, and they want to go into these spaces because they're women, because they feel safe there, because they do get abused. Like, and you're saying no, you're not allowed here because you're trans. To say that
males do not become female.
To say that this is
they're not there because they're male.
Hold on. To say that this is not cis versus trans is incorrect. It is.
No.
It is.
No, it's males versus females.
Okay. And is anybody arguing for like gender? Is anybody arguing for? Hold on. Is anybody arguing that cis men should be able to enter like female spaces?
What's the difference between a cis man and a man who identifies as a woman?
Because one's a woman.
One's a woman. Yep. Any man can identify as a woman and therefore is a woman.
Yep.
At any time, you believe that.
I mean, if someone like decides like, there has to be some sort of like, we take personal identification seriously in every other case. All right. How do I know that you're gay? You told me. How do you know that I'm gay? I told you. All right. We do it with like religious identifications as well. What does it take? Self-identification. But what hasn't been demonstrated is that this is any harm to anyone else. Like, and it always goes back to like, at what identities ought to have their own spaces, and why are they legitimate? So when you say single-sex spaces, it is cis versus trans. I'm sorry, that's what it is. That's what the conversation is about. What dangers are there? Because there's no empirical evidence to suggest that trans women sharing spaces with women, there's no evidence to suggest that that's a problem at all.
I would say, by contrast, there is actually evidence talking about the importance of single-sex spaces and why
What's an
they matter
example?
for women and girls, why they matter for women and girls. And one of the things you said, we allow self-identification in every other case. One of the things
including ours, including gay.
One of the things that's been made regarding civil rights law is a parallel between sex and race. Now, do you believe that people have like a right to self-identify with regard to race, and that should be respected?
I think it's an interesting society. I think it's an interesting conversation. I haven't done a lot of research on it, but I would not say definitively no. Right? So, like, for example, like, why can someone who has one white parent and one black parent, why do they identify as black? Kind of a social construction, right? I'm not saying that I'm completely sold on it, but I'm saying that it's not a simple no, that's ridiculous, because if race is a social construct, and it is, so I've been kind of eyeing Chad, but come on, y'all, race is a social construct, all right? It's fake. we made it up. Like, I don't know. I'm interested to see where that conversation can lead.
That would be quite interesting.
Yeah, it'd be quite interesting. But there's a little. It's also a little bit like, I don't think it's as prevalent because like race and sex are different. Race and gender are different in terms of like how society treats them and the impetus they place on them. Mm-hmm. And like, so I think that's a little bit different. So it's an interesting conversation. I wouldn't say it's a direct parallel, but what is I think a decent analogy is, where does the identity only spaces stop? Like, what would you say to someone who doesn't want to share a locker room with gay men? What would you say to a man who doesn't want to share a locker room space with gay men? Can we call them homophobic?
I don't believe that's a valid comparison, and here's why. So people are saying, oh, well, so if women and girls want single sex services and spaces away from members of the male sex, that means that it could then be extended to race and extended to, say, for gay men.
I'm not saying that.
However, the issue is that there are statistics indicating that members of the male sex, males, regardless of gender identity, are more likely to commit acts of sexual violence.
Do you think that trans women are a representative? Do you think that trans women are a representative sample of the male sex?
I believe that they are members of the male sex.
You think that they are a representative sample?
Just as likely as all other members of the male sex to do so.
So are they more or less likely?
Why are we engaging in exceptionality?
We're saying
because they're an exception. We're saying they're an exception.
Yeah, they are an exception. They're not a representative sample of the male population. They're not. I'm sorry. You can't.
But why? So your argument is, you're saying that there's somehow, presumably some way of knowing that members of the male sex who identify as female are somehow less likely to commit acts of sexual violence against members of the female sex.
I'm saying that there's no empirical data. I'm saying that there's no empirical data to support the evidence that they will. In states where they have allowed gender-inclusive bathrooms and trans-inclusive bathrooms, there's no evidence that there's been any sort of like uptick in crime or sexual assault or anything of that nature. So it's happened. Kind of like how the conservatives like from way back when said that, if we allow gay marriage, that's going to lead to bestiality. Well, no, it fucking didn't. So like that turns out that was a dumb argument.
However, there's been recent problems with the inclusion of males into female prisons and allowing sex self-identification regarding male inmates who are charged with sexually violent offenses.
I do think that's a different conversation. Like that one
put into female prisons.
I do think that there in that case there does need to be more than like, because a male prisoner who's already shady might decide to identify as a woman to get into a safer prison. Now that's a very complicated conversation, but the evidence for like showers and bathrooms, that's a lot less complicated. We don't have there's data exists that we've looked at that, and it's
actually I'll send you an article that I think is quite interesting. It was published in the Yale Law and Policy Review. It was by a Black legal scholar, W. Burlett Carter, and it was how bathrooms became separated by sex. And it talks about like the social and political history of it dating back centuries.
Interesting. And I can see
with regard to valid concerns about the safety of women and girls with relation to members of the male sex, regardless of how they identify, regardless of gender identity.
Regardless of gender, you can't say regardless of gender identity.
Regardless of gender identity.
You can't say that as if it has bearing on what you just said. Like you're lumping again. You cannot assume that trans women are a representative sample of cis men. You can't. It's incorrect to do so. I can see the study that shows empirically that there's no evidence suggesting that trans inclusive policies result in any sort of uptick in negative harms. So I guess we might have to disagree, agree to disagree on that. But going back to the
Yeah, I still believe, we can agree to disagree on the importance of single sex services and spaces,
well,
because
sure, but it's also like
have to be preserved.
well, they don't have to be. They are preserved.
They do.
No one's talking about like getting rid of them. Where did trans women go to the bathroom?
I don't know why they can't use the men's restroom.
Do you think that maybe they have some legitimate concerns about their safety in those?
Well, why don't women have legitimate concerns about
because
men
it's not empirically supported and
going into their spaces? You're like these men are women, so they have
because one has empirical support behind it and one doesn't. Why don't you care about those? I could flip that back on you. Why don't you care about these trans women? One has empirical support and one doesn't.
So why? It's ridiculous that you also are not thinking about the cases, like the cases involving the women who are having to deal with these men who identify as women coming into their spaces with regard to changing rooms, such as in the case of the Wee Spa incident, as well as
so this is the analogy I drew earlier. What about like gay men in these spaces?
But again, so are gay men more likely than straight men to commit like sexual harassment among like within sex? I don't think that makes much sense. Nor do I think the comparison to lesbians makes much sense either, because what we're talking about the male sex versus the female sex. We're not talking about these other groups. And so I think
does it not bother you at all that the empirical evidence suggested like there is no uptick in violence, there is no uptick in sexual assault, there is nothing, no uptick in any sort of like negative externalities resulting from trans-inclusive bathroom policies? Does that factor into your decision at all?
Well, I would like to see that evidence.
Sure, I can send you my entire.
Send it to me.
Sure,
totally.
Yeah, but if it did, would that change your mind?
But what I would wonder,
if it did, would it change your mind? Would it not change your mind, but would it inform your opinion more?
I believe that it would inform my opinion more. Okay. However, I still will say that I believe that there is a problem here, and we've actually yet to really measure it. One could easily say with regard to like sexual harassment, before it was actually recorded and before there were more cases of it being recorded and actually being legitimately dealt with in the workplace, you could easily say empirical evidence shows that it did not exist. However, it did exist and it was happening.
Of course, but you can't also make the question is you can't use that to make the exclusion of it. You can't use that to make the assertion that it definitely is happening. Like, yeah, there's the Wee Spa incident, and that is horrible, but also, like, that happened, and it got national attention. Like, not international attention. So it seems like if this incident is getting, like, international attention, maybe it's kind of rare. Right?
I don't know. I don't think that means that it's rare.
I mean, that in and of itself wouldn't be proof that it's rare, but, again, there's no evidence suggesting that it's not rare. And in fact, most of the evidence is pointing. We have to have the null hypothesis here. The null hypothesis is that introducing this would not change. That's not a moral judgment. It's like a way of like collecting data. Right. So, and right now there is no evidence suggesting that there is this uptick in crimes. There is no uptick in like sexual harassment. I guess what we'll shelve this for now. But I don't know if I don't know if we got to explore this. What is gender ideology to you? What does that mean? And why is it harmful to gay and lesbian people?
So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which I think is one of the things that will be a agree to disagree on, which is this idea of redefining sex vis-a-vis gender identity, and this sense of like you were saying, this idea that like you're attracted to like a masculine.
Because it's more accurate.
Body,
yeah.
A masculine appearing body, even if it's a female body that's masculinized, or a male body that's been very feminized.
What would you say if I said that I saw some trans men I thought were hot? Does that mean I'm now bisexual, or can I still call myself gay?
You're going by the medical alteration of like secondary sex characteristics. So your perception is that they're members of the male sex.
And? I know that they're trans men, and I still think that they're attractive. So, am I not gay?
So, would you also be attracted to the ones who don't undergo any kind of medicalization at all, who have their who are incredible?
Well, no, but then again, I'm not attracted to like members of the male sex who are very feminine. Now that has nothing to do with a value judgment, just what I'm personally attracted to. But they wouldn't be any less men. Like effeminate men are not no less men. And their identity deserves to be respected as much as a masculine man. They're just as much of a man as anyone else. But I'm talking about attraction. I feel like Kurtis would say that I'm not gay, that's a little homophobic, right? Telling someone who is gay that no, they're not who they say they are because of definitions that you have imposed on them. Because to me, that's a man. Now,
so you would be like ideally you would be with this, this member of the female sex. Like you would engage in intercourse with somebody who's like actually a member of the female sex. Would you?
Well, if I wasn't married, sure. But I'm married, so no one other than my husband, who I love.
Oh, that's quite interesting.
Another interesting thing is like trans people who are sex workers who do pornography, when they found that, like, based on this definition of sex, trans people, like trans women, they should be in the gay category because they are males, and that's what males and homosexual males are attracted to sex. But it didn't do well there. No one watched it. But when they put it into the straight category, it got a lot more
fetishization.
Not fetishes. Well, a lot of porn's fetishization. Like muscles are a fetish, right? Like having a muscle fetish doesn't mean that you're more or less like, if you like muscular women, that's a gender.
There is something.
But why are straight men more attracted to trans women than?
There is something distinct about the consumption of the she-male category.
I wouldn't say
by
that.
straight men.
I wouldn't say that.
I
know that's what it's called, but porn is awful. Like there's a lot of negative stuff on porn. I know.
Yeah, I think it requires a lot of like unpacking regarding like pornography and the content itself and how it works. So.
I do think it's interesting, but also like porn is horrible in a lot of ways. Like I'm using it as an example that like straight men are attracted to trans women, and that seems to be like part of their sexuality. And I would never say that they're not straight. Now I do know that like porn can be problematic in a lot of ways. Lord help you if there's a person of color in the porn. That's, oh no, the titles of those are real awful.
The sexual and racial stereotyping is terrible in porn. I mean, that's a separate thing in itself.
It's a separate thing, and like porn's weird, but we can't divorce porn from sexuality, right? Like what do we look up when no one's watching? To me, that there is something interesting there, and even
there's something, and it's interesting
just
too.
It's just something that wouldn't be appropriate for like Twitch TOS, right?
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting. Yeah, it is interesting to like think about. One of the things I liked when you were talking about the studies, the studies that sexologist James Cantor listed was, you were talking about how it listed perceived like sexual orientation versus like fantasy. And I think that's one of the interesting things in sexology studies studies in sexology rather, is this like idea of, sexual orientation versus in some ways like what the fantasy would be. So, a straight man would express like, yeah, he's heterosexual, totally heterosexual. But then like you have the fantasy. What's the fantasy? What's the expressed fantasy there? Which is also often kind of interesting too. And you have this presumption of a heteronormative society without any kind of, fetishization or any kind of that. And of course, those things exist within society among heterosexual people, even among lesbians and gay men. And I find it quite interesting, but yeah, what else were we going to discuss?
I guess, probably are you okay with this? Be like the last topic.
Oh yeah, totally.
Sure.
Do you talk about,
or do you want to have a topic?
Yeah. Would you like to talk? I don't know. I feel like we could end on something nice so that it's not as difficult. If you want, I could talk a little bit about like, being gay and gender nonconforming, and then sort of discuss. I wanted to mention one of the books that I read
Oh, you
recently
got a
that
physical book like a boomer.
from
I'm kidding.
I know, right? That's how I am with like I always I have
No,
like
I
a
read
stack
physical
of
books
them.
way better. But then
Yeah.
if I'm trying to take notes, like the ability to like highlight and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. I have to like tab things and underline because I struggle with like digital computer stuff because like
I know. It's super common.
my eyes
Yeah.
end up killing me. But I think that one of the really great things about, you know, well, first I should talk about being gender nonconforming as a child. Yeah. So when I was, you know, really young, I was always pretty gender nonconforming. I mean, with regard to like, you know, when you see in the studies about like cross gender behavior, I would be one of those boys who exhibited, you know, what they would call like the cross gender behavior was more, you know, was more akin to like the girls. And in terms of I really liked hanging out with girls and, you know, in high school preferred like having female friends as opposed to male friends, which I know sounds weird. Um, but
Super common. Yeah.
that was sort of what, you know, that was my background growing up. And of course, you know, growing up in the South, in like a relatively rural
Is
area.
really fun.
But
Only good experiences.
right.
Yeah, for any queer youth, like yeah, growing up in the South.
Right. It's like totally. But you know, and I think that in some ways one relates to this kind of like this sense of distress that one can have with relation to like the body and the mind. And that was something that I found interesting as explored by Susan Evans and Marcus Evans
I am
in
going to
their
give that a read here.
area. You did?
I am going to give it a read,
Oh yeah,
even though
totally.
reading's for nerds.
Yeah, totally. You know, reading it, I think that one of the great things about it too is that the Evanses they provide, in my view, like a better approach to the issue than you know some of the texts like you've cited, like for example, like Anderson with When Harry Became
When
Sally.
Harry Became Sally and Irreversible Damage are garbage books, and anyone who takes them seriously should be laughed out of the room.
And I think that with the Evanses, however, what they give is they talk about individual cases, thinking about you know comorbid mental health conditions that underlie like you know the feeling of dissociation between the mind and the body and these sorts of things, which is what I think you know a very kind of individual approach to each patient. Thinking through carefully with each individual, and I like in particular they discuss, you know, not wanting to take like a explicitly like pro or you know or anti kind of position for the analyst, but rather you know the analyst working together with the patient to sort of figure out where the feelings of distress come from, what they exist in relation to, and that's something that I really like about it, and
It's
I
not
think
from the way you're describing it. There's nothing that I would disagree with. I think everyone should
yeah,
play all, especially
it
regarding medical
sets it apart.
decisions. What I'm concerned about is like this. There's a lot of nuance there, which is great, but then there's also like the anti-nuance coming from uh, what seems like this is my perception of your organization is that trans people aren't who they say they are. That trans women are not women, trans men are not men, and therefore they're performing this sort of like narcissistic, this narcissistic play that they're putting on. They're adopting identities that are not theirs and like making a fool of them. Like there was an article about like a non-binary person who was like talking about her tuck or their tuck, I should say, talking about their tuck, and you like described that as like what was the actual words he used? Basically, it was like a form of like not assault. That's too strong of a word, but like. Can you just describe like why that was bad? I'll find it.
So I said that the individual describing like tucking his penis in as my tuck is a meaty girl. That's the quote from it. And I said that he was abusing and exploiting the twin histories of sexism and racism, which have particularly impacted women of color in order to justify.
Do you think this is a black person?
Male exhibitionism.
Hold on. This is a black person. Do you think that we're more qualified to talk about personal experiences of racism than they are?
I don't, but I'm specifically talking about like this way in which this man is using women and particularly black women.
Okay, I don't understand.
There's a problem with
So
that.
hold on.
There's a problem with that.
How can you square that circle if you support gender nonconformity? This person is just talking about the experience of being a femme person, a feminine person, wearing a dress, which a dress isn't women's clothes, right? That's
However,
that's supporting the gender binary.
the individual,
But
the
they were talking.
is
No, they were talking about like the expectations that when you wear traditionally feminine coded clothing, that there's these societal expectations that you have to like remove all aspects of masculinity, and it seems like someone who supports gender nonconformity would be all in favor of that.
However, the weird thing about the piece is like in support of the bulge showing through like a tight-fitting feminine clothing.
Yeah, why is that bad?
Different. That's quite different.
Oh, why is that? Why is that bad for like gender nonconformity?
That's different from gender nonconformity because this is centered around like this kind of like showing the bulge of the penis in a tight-fitting feminine attire.
Why is it important that it's feminine?
That's odd. It's really quite
so
strange.
When someone wears like compression shorts and
see somebody invoking like the histories of sexism and racism.
Wait, we shouldn't talk about racism. Okay, we're very white, all right. But this notion of like, what about at the gym? Like when people are wearing like compression shorts and they're showing off their bulges, which is just a part of like anatomy. Like, why is that considered vulgar? Why is it considered like a form of assault? Like, or a form of an attack on women to show a bulge.
So if a male puts on tight-fitting feminine attire, and
why is it important that it's feminine?
Bulge, just say tight-fitting. Showing off this bulge.
Just say tight-fitting attire.
Showing off this bulge. It's a dress, so it's cloth. Showing off a bulge around, like, say, women and girls, using a changing room. There's a problem there.
Would it be better if it was like shorts? If it was, you keep kind of avoiding this. Why is it important that it's feminine?
The piece isn't about shorts, though. The piece is about a tight-fitting dress.
Yeah, but you're saying that
it also seems to line up with male exhibitionism.
But you seem to like be, if you're supporting gender nonconformity, why does it matter that it's feminine attire? Why does feminine attire exist if gender nonconformity?
I think the problem isn't the fact that he's wearing a dress. It's that the piece is in defense of a bulge.
Yeah, why is a bulge wrong? And it's in the context that you're talking about, it was like among friends. Like, this wasn't like, they weren't in like a locker room, or anything like that. Like, this was like among friends, and they were talking. I thought this should be like, you should agree with this as someone who doesn't support, who supports gender nonconformity. That like, why is it considered like you have to remove all traces of masculinity if you put on feminine attire? And that's what they were talking about. And the way you like keep drawing attention to the
penis. The penis is not a trace of masculinity. The penis is a male sexual organ. That's not a trace of masculinity.
It is a trace of masculinity. That's why the bulge is a thing, all right? Right, if you can see
the penis is not inherently masculine.
It's not inherently masculine, but you're trying.
The penis is male.
But you're trying.
It's male.
You're drawing this juxtaposition between like the feminine attire and the male bulge, as if. How does that? How can you square the circle?
I think it is quite a strange piece with regard to like the in defense of the meaty bulge and saying my girl is a meaty bulge. That's there are problems. There are problems with that.
So proceeds a man's kind of abuse and exploitations of the experiences of women of color, especially black women. This person has experienced.
I think it is that, and we've seen that too. We've seen that too with regard to, say, Laverne Cox, who said that black women have to talk with black men about their attraction to quote unquote trans women. It's weird. It's weird that it ends up being men throwing things back onto women.
Well, no, it's a woman talking about her sexuality.
No, people don't change sex. Men aren't.
We're talking about gender, and also, yeah, they do change sex.
No, they don't.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
What do you want to talk about at the end? Something.
Why do you think this organization has to exist? And what would you say to like, because it seems to be, I can think of a lot of like, I've experienced homophobic abuse in my entire time online because I'm gay and I'm online, and those are the only two factors you need. All right. I'm sure you've experienced homophobic abuse as well online. If you're visibly or openly gay online, you're going to experience a lot of homophobic abuse, and certainly a lot of it's directed my way. But most of it comes from like Nazis. So why, with all the focus, because we still have a lot to do. Like there's still a lot of gay issues around the world, like housing discrimination, that's up there, but that seems like set dressing. Why focus just on trans people? Because it seems like this is not a pro-gay organization so much as it is an anti-trans organization. It seems like that's where the focus is.
I do not think it's like against trans people. I think there's quite the problem with this idea of like, oh, well, human beings can change sex, which they can't.
Which they can.
Agree to disagree. And the idea that sex is interchangeable with gender identity. Agree to disagree on that.
I didn't ever said it was.
And so there are problems with that, which I underscore. And as I mentioned to you as well, which we haven't discussed as much, but I think it is still significant. I do believe that homophobia, misogyny as well as homophobia are factoring into, in some ways, the children and young people who are presenting with gender dysphoria and who are being medicalized.
But you assert that with no evidence.
There is evidence, though.
Is your evidence going to be opinions of people?
The evidence has actually discussed that, and they discuss concerns. They discussed the concerns among professionals at the Tavistock, where it had been treating children and young people for gender dysphoria. There were concerns about the fast tracking of these individuals, some of whom in particular had been, there were lesbians, lesbian girls who grew to feel that because they were sexually oriented toward the same sex and because they were not feminine, they were supposed to be men. There were cases involving boys, involving young men who, because they were sexually oriented toward men and because they were not masculine, they thought that they had to somehow be female. That is related to homophobia. I'm
not going to take your word for it. There's more to it than that. It's not just being gay. All right, it's not just being attracted to the same sex. There's more to gender identity than that. But again, why the focus on trans people? Because it is kind of attacking trans people. Like a lot of the concerns of trans people is like, I want to be able to use the bathroom that aligns with my gender identity. I just want to shit and piss in peace, and it's become like a political issue. Like if I'm sexually assaulted, I want to go to a center and like get treated and like get this kind of safety. And you're like, I think it's kind of gross to deny that. Like to deny them that because like their male bodies, and asserting without any sort of evidence that they're more dangerous to women.
But I don't see how people are actually being denied the facilities. Technically, there are, for example, in Canada, the Vancouver Rape Relief Crisis Center. It's been attacked repeatedly by trans activists specifically for upholding female-only spaces.
Yep, but that's all. Another way to say that is denying trans women.
There were actually other shelters that existed that were mixed sex and that catered.
So find another baker.
LGBT.
So find another baker, but for like sexual trauma. Isn't that the same argument?
Members of the male sex rightfully entitled to spaces that are otherwise for members of the female sex. Why do you think that they're entitled to those spaces?
I think that they're entitled to those spaces because it's a matter of like comfort, but also like I'm trying to like I'm trying to like find this middle ground that you're not willing to like meet us on. Like, what happens if there are no other spaces? Like, what happens if there's not another baker? Do you know that? I'm sorry. Do you know that argument that find another baker? Are you familiar with that?
I don't think it's comparable here. When you have the distinction between like a single sex rape shelter versus like having a mixed sex shelter versus having, I do not believe that the analogy makes sense regarding the baking of the cake. That's a false analogy.
I think it's a pretty good analogy because like you are denying these trans people like spaces based on this like perception that they're not real women and therefore it would be dangerous.
I don't think it's because they're not real women. It's because they're members of the male sex.
Which is another way of saying that they're not real women.
They're not. There's not a real woman. There's members of the female sex and there's members of the male sex. I don't see why you get into this like
because gender identity is more than that.
Versus real man. That doesn't make sense.
Because that's what you're using it for. Like you're saying that like we don't. If you were to say like these support centers are for women, okay, if they're for women instead of females, then would trans women be able to be there? Would that be okay?
So for women, and by women you mean like you can include any man, any Any male
So
individual
you're using man interchangeably.
who identifies as a woman.
See,
That's
you're
what you,
using man and male interchangeably. You're the one conflating sex and gender here.
yeah, but a man is an adult human male. A woman is an adult human female.
Okay, cool. Neat. So you kind of are just an anti-trans organization, right? I don't see how you're supporting me. Like, what am I going to get out of, as a gay man, what am I going to get out of your organization? How are you fighting for me? And Kurtis, you can hop in here in a second. How are you fighting for me? It just seems like you're just anti-trans, and that's not helping me.
I don't think it's anti-trans though. I think it's specifically talking about the misogyny and the homophobia that have emerged.
What you qualify as homophobia is like
rights movement.
What you qualify as homophobia just most of the time isn't. Like this notion that like it's homophobic to redefine like same-sex attraction to same-gender attraction. I've laid out my case, and I thought I made it pretty well that like same-sex attraction in the way that you define sex is useless. It's meaningless. It's inaccurate. Same-gender attraction is way more accurate in the way that you define sex. So how's that homophobic? Kurtis, honey, I'm gay. I get to decide what's homophobic just as much as you do. I'm sorry. I'm fighting with Kurtis in the chat. Is there any last thing that you'd like to talk about? Because I gotta pee so much.
Oh, it's okay. But yeah, definitely with regard to, I wanted to plug the Evans's book that I really quite liked on gender dysphoria.
Do you have the chat pulled up at all?
No.
Can you send it to me on Twitter and I'll put it in the chat?
Yeah, totally.
No, you shouldn't have to. Hold on, it's already in the chat, right? Hey, give me a sec. Gender dysphoria, a therapeutic model for working with children, adolescents, and young adults. Full title?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put that in chat.
It's published by Phoenix Publishing House. They've done a few other works regarding like mental health, which I really like. They have some good ones. And there was one other book too that was more recent. It was from Spinifex Press. It's called Not Dead Yet. And it was Feminism, Passion, and Women's Liberation. So it's particularly by the older demographic of lesbian feminists, those whom many of whom you would call TERFs. But they write women's movement.
I read, right?
Well, I mean, of course, I watched your video, and you describing people as objectively transphobic bigots, dismissing women's concerns as them being TERFs.
Do you think that when I dismiss religious people's concerns about religious freedom and gay rights that I'm being like anti-Christian?
Why are you comparing women to religious people though? And I think that's
because a lot of
that's a dumb analogy too.
The dumb analogy is to say that you're pro-gay when you're really just anti-trans. Like that's how a lot of people like dress up bigotry. It's like I'm not anti anybody. I'm pro.
I mean, you're positioning women who have concerns, particularly lesbian feminists, in the position of Christian fundamentalists, and that is
fundamentalists.
That is absurd.
That's not absurd.
In saying, well, women who have these concerns are the same as like religious.
Do you think that they can just have those concerns and like if data doesn't back it up at all, or if reality doesn't back it up at all, they're still allowed to have those concerns and that should inform policy decisions? Would you want concerns or data informing policy decisions?
Well, I believe in the data. But I also am wondering, like, is the data actually accounting for all of these cases, all of these instances? What is the data not accounting for? That's one of the other things, of course, we can't measure for the cases that are not recorded. We can't measure.
Of course not. But that goes both ways, right?
That's one of the difficulties as well.
It is, but that goes both ways. Like you can't measure for all the trans people who like weren't recorded as like being abused, weren't recorded as being like assaulted, weren't recorded as like having an experience in childhood, right? So that can go either way. I'm not saying that that's proof in either direction, but I'm saying that you can't use the gaps argument to assert a positive claim in either direction. Okay, but hey, it was cordial. Thank you for mad respect. I've been trying to get a debate with something like this for a long time. It took a lot of thank you for reaching out, coming forward, answering the call. I do appreciate that. A lot of respect coming from me for that. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Justin.
Yeah.
You're very.
Well, sorry. What's up?
Oh, what?
You were saying something?
Oh no, I said you're very sweet.
Oh, well, well, you're very sweet too. I did have fun.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, I did have fun. And now we're gonna bring Kurtis on here in a second. So I want to try. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night. Night, right?
Yeah,
same time. It's fun. Same time. So yeah, have a wonderful rest of your night. Okay.
Oh, you too. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, thank you so much. And done. Right? Done. All right, y'all. How we doing? I need just a little bit of a break. So where's Kurtis? Hello. Every Zoom meeting starts like this.
Through me doing that.
Oh, you might want to mute the stream.
All right.
Which you can tell I'm not a good streamer.
Jingles, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Wait, is that you or the echo of the stream?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. I think I'm halfway to set up here. Hold on.
No problem. Okay,
Jingles,
I can see you.
right.
There we go. Cool.
What's going on?
What's going on? Just had a pretty nice conversation with Donovan over there.
Yeah, Donovan's a big sweetheart.
Yeah, a big sweetheart. Very, very nice. Not great on trans issues, but, it can still be nice. So, is this your organization? I heard you on, what's it called, the Disaffected podcast. You said this is an organization that you started.
Yeah, well, it's certainly one that I helped found along with Donovan and some other homosexuals. And we're a pro-gay organization, despite what you say. That's definitely what I would love to start with. The idea that we're anti-trans, I think, is ridiculous. I don't think it's anti-trans to talk about offering care options for people with gender dysphoria that focus on talk therapy versus rushing them to medicalization.
Do you still think it's funny when trans people kill themselves?
Well, I don't think that statistic is backed up the way that you think it is. I think that
Hold on, you answer the question. Do you still think it's funny when trans people kill themselves?
Oh, is that what this is supposed to be? Like some sort of like gotcha? Are you gonna like?
Well, you're saying you're not an anti-trans organization. I'm just interested in like the views of the founder. See, do you still think it's funny when trans people kill themselves?
Well, I definitely think it's funny when a trans person that
do you think it's funny when they kill themselves?
I think it's funny when they target me for 4 hours. If they decide to do it, why not? If they harass me for 4 hours, like.
So as long as so it's okay to think it's funny when a trans person kills themselves as long as they were mean, right?
As long as they were harassing you, what's so bigoted about being,
So can't someone just use this as an excuse to be homophobic? What's so wrong with being homophobic? If you said that it's funny when trans people kill themselves.
But it's not transphobic if I'm just happy that my bully is trying to kill themselves.
Specifically because they're trans, though.
Who said it was specifically because they're trans?
Where does the 41%?
Specifically because they're
Where
bullied.
does the 41% come from? Why did you say that?
It's just a reminder that.
It's a reminder
that people who are
what?
likely to kill themselves
who are what?
Also more likely to be homophobic.
Hold on, who are what? It's they're more likely to be what? Huh?
Homophobic.
No. 41%. That doesn't apply to homophobes.
I just said 41% of trans people are more likely to attempt to kill themselves, and
you think it's
trans
funny?
people are more likely to be homophobic.
And you think it's funny when they kill themselves?
I definitely think it's funny when homophobic people try to kill themselves. Yeah.
Okay. So, was this person being homophobic? Because I read the thread. No, they weren't.
They were.
No,
they were targeting me for 4 hours, calling me homophobic names and harassing me. Even after I asked them to leave me alone.
Like what? I had the thread pulled up. Like what?
Okay.
I had the thread pulled up. What were they calling you? Let's see. Let's see what this person was calling you.
Okay.
I'm not seeing it in this thread. I mean, they're not banned.
So you're just like looking and you're not showing everyone like the fact that they were,
I'm showing the thread that I got.
And
I'm showing the thread.
Asked them multiple times to leave me alone, and you're upset that I was like happy that my bully might try to kill themselves.
Yeah, I think it's pretty rich.
Kind of like victim blaming.
I think victim blaming. I think it's pretty rich.
Blaming?
I think it's pretty rich that a coward who has said this is going to pretend that they didn't found an anti-trans organization. Yeah, I'm gonna kind of call that out.
I think it's pretty rich that you're upset that a gay person who was being harassed was laughing at the idea that.
Honey, I'm gay. Honey, I'm gay. You can't pull that shit on me.
Why are you upset about that?
Honey, I'm gay. You can't pull that shit on me.
Why
am I upset that someone like thought it's funny
that your gay status override mine?
Oh, it doesn't. Why does your gay status override mine?
Because I'm gay, I'm allowed to, be mean back.
Sweet, and if I'm gay, I'm allowed to call you out. Do you think being gay is an excuse you can say it's funny when trans people kill themselves?
You think harassing someone for 4 hours is justified just because they're gay? Like,
just because they're gay. Was it now? This is because I know you're a weasel. Was it just because you were gay, or is it because you were being transphobic? I mean, you think they're the same thing.
What was I doing
right?
that was being transphobic?
I can't check now because you got yeeted off the internet for saying that it's funny when trans people kill themselves. I can't check it. But I'm not going to take your word for it.
You said that you had the thread pulled up. So what did I say that was transphobic?
I can't. I don't know. The only
incurred their 4-hour harassment campaign
because they took a screenshot of you. I have the screenshot pulled up on screen right now.
In response to is automatically worse.
41%. Is that a threat? Just a reminder. You telling me to kill myself?
That I said is like automatically worse. Is what you're saying? Like I'm not allowed to react.
Sweetie, no. You can react as much as you want to, and I'm allowed to call you a transphobic piece of shit who founded an anti-trans organization. And it's rich that you don't have. If you're gonna be transphobic, say it with your fucking chest. Don't weasel behind this. No, I'm just pro-gay. Quit being a weak little coward.
Homosexual is transphobic. You can't even say how I was being transphobic. Oh,
how are you? How funny? How funny you thought it was that trans people kill themselves? This isn't transphobic. Oh, why did you specifically? This wasn't about this individual. This is about them being trans. You fucking coward. All right. This is about 41% of what? 41% of what? How is this not in relation to trans people?
They were spending 4 hours harassing me.
On Twitter.
I brought up.
Shut it the fuck off. Log off. Go outside. Touch grass. None of this justifies saying that you think it's funny when trans people kill themselves. And this is not directed at your. This is not directed at your abuse. It was directed at trans people. That's where the 41% comes from. All right.
Why does it bother you when gay people defend themselves? Like you're upset over what I said, but you're not upset over the fact they.
Honey, I've suffered like a lot of homophobic abuse, just like you. I think it's great when like gay people defend themselves from actual homophobes. I don't think it's then fine to say you think it's funny when trans people kill themselves.
Anyone other than yourself. I don't know.
If a woman was harassing a gay person, can you be sexist against them?
But do me a favor, don't speak for anyone other than yourself.
You started a fucking organization to speak for us. You started a fucking organization to speak for gay men.
It's not homophobia.
You started an organization to speak for gay men. Don't you fucking try to pull that on me. You said you are an anti-trans bigot. You think it's funny when trans people kill themselves, and I'm glad I got to call you out on it in public, all right? This isn't a debate.
You did a shitty job of calling me out. What kind of shitty job?
Calling you out?
Call me out.
Oh, sweetie, honey, sugar pie. You're trying to weasel out of this. This is the person who founded a pro-gay organization.
Calling me out? Why aren't you calling out the person who harassed me for 4 hours?
Because they didn't. How did they harass you? You can't say it.
4 hours tweeting me even after.
Oh, go outside. Go outside. Log the fuck off. That's what you could do to like stop that. You don't have to say it's funny if they kill themselves. All right.
Okay, so you're not.
You just justified any and all bigotry against like you specifically because you were
a bunch of other horrible names. Who are you to like tell me that my?
Who are you to say that it's funny for trans people to kill themselves?
They also called me a bunch of homophobic.
Like
names.
what? Like
they
what?
Called me a bunch of, I don't remember.
You don't remember? You don't remember because it didn't exist. It didn't happen.
You don't have the thread pulled up like you said you did.
I do. It's right fucking here. All right, so let's find the exact one. All right, come on. Let's find it. Just remind. Is that a threat? Let's see. Isn't that a threat? Let's see. Where are you, Becca? All right, come on. Let's find it. I have the exact thread pulled up because they're not.
What's more is they spent a long time harassing me, even after I asked them to stop. The idea that you're
and all of that is fine, and now it's fine to say it's funny for trans people to kill themselves.
You're not in this to defend homosexuals at all. I was a gay person defending myself against a homophobic trans person.
Oh, honey, you are not going to pull that shit on me. I've been put in the goddamn hospital from a fucking homophobic hate attack. All right, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that what you have gone through is the same. All right,
spent 4 hours calling me names.
Oh, they called you names. You don't remember what they are, but they were definitely homophobic. What, they call you transphobic? If someone calls you transphobic, is that homophobic?
Why don't you find some real shit to be angry about, like the gay people who are getting converted?
Oh, sure they are, honey. I'm sure that's absolutely happening. All right.
Like, please please get angry over something that actually matters, not me.
I am, dude. I'm upset at like actual homophobia. All right, there's actual homophobia in the world. You dedicated an entire movement
again,
just to
like
shit on trans people, and you're gonna pretend that you're sticking up for gay people.
Homophobia for other people.
You don't get to. Hey, you don't get to. You don't get to. Why do you get to? You're claiming to. You're saying that this is homophobic.
Anyone who feels that gender ideology is homophobic, we're allowed to believe that it's homophobic.
And I'm allowed to call you a transphobic bigot, am I not?
And I'm allowed to call you a homophobic hypocrite.
I'm a homophobic hypocrite.
Gay status,
sweet.
Your gay.
Oh, it has nothing to do. Oh no, then your gay status means nothing either. Your gay status means nothing either.
Your gay status does not shield you from being a homophobic trash bag.
Oh, and I'm a homophobic trash bag?
You're still being homophobic.
And just because you're gay, you're still being transphobic?
Enabling an ideology that deeply affects gay people.
Oh, no. All right. It was fun talking to you. You're a homophobic. Not homophobic. Well, you're a little homophobic, too.
You're a homophobic trash bag.
Oh, cool. You're a transphobic piece of shit who thinks it's funny when trans people kill themselves.
Listen to the lesbians you're ignoring. Listen to women.
I do listen to lesbians.
Women.
All right.
Listen
to trans people.
Ignoring us.
All right. Listen to the guy who thinks it's funny when trans people kill themselves and doesn't have the backbone to say it with his fucking chest.
Okay, you want to know what, Jingles? How about this?
You want to know what? What?
What I said was wrong.
What? Do I want to know what? Bye. Oh, okay. That was fun. That was actually really fun. All right, y'all. That's all I wanted to do.